War Queen Theska Draxvin stood amidst the hum of the orbital command fortress, her infrared vision tracking the rhythmic rise and fall of Marcus's chest. The air in his specific quadrant was thick, heavy with the nitrogen-oxygen mix he required to live. She watched a single bead of sweat roll down his temple. The human was so dangerously still. The warmth of his hand against the cold, chitinous plating of her lower arm was the only temperature she trusted in this sterile war room. He was her war bond, a creature of soft skin and hard intent, chosen despite the collective hiss of the hive memory. Theska crossed all four of her armored arms and waited. Around her, the high command of the Draxi swarm flickered like dying embers in the holographic light of the tactical maps. They were uneasy. Their carapaces rattled with a rhythmic, clicking anxiety that set her acid blood to a slow simmer. To them, the human was a liability, a fragile pocket of warmth in a vacuum-cold empire. He wore the Draxi Fong pendant she had gifted him, the white bones standing out sharply against his dark tactical gear. It was the highest honor her species could bestow, a shed battle fong that signified he was an extension of the queen herself. Yet, to the generals, it was a joke. General Zal, a veteran with a cracked exoskeleton and a bitter disposition, stepped into the pressurized zone. He did not bow. Instead, he let his gaze linger on Marcus with a deliberate, mocking slowness. Your war queen bonds with a species that breaks in vacuum. Bold strategy. Zal clicked, the translation matrix filtering his disdain into a jagged electronic rasp. Theska did not deign to respond with words. She simply tightened the orientation of her sensory stalks, her acid-rich blood warming as she felt Marcus's pulse through the skin of her arm. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the general. He remained a statue of Terran flesh, his eyes fixed on the empty space beyond the viewports. A targeted electromagnetic pulse at 2.4 GHz disrupts unshielded circuitry within milliseconds. Military-grade EMP weapons on Earth require truck-mounted generators. A human generating one organically would output roughly $10 ($9 watts), a discharge equivalent to a natural lightning bolt. The Draxi understood physics, but they did not understand the biology of the man standing beside their queen. The tactical AI calculated a 99.7% victory probability, Theska noted, her voice a low, vibrating hum that echoed in the hive link. It did not account for Marcus. The silence that followed was brittle. It was the kind of silence that preceded a hull breach. The other Draxi shifted, their infrared signatures blooming with shades of skeptical orange and dismissive blue. They saw a pet. They saw a curiosity she had plucked from a backwater dirt world to satisfy a whim of the blood oath. They did not see the predator she had spent months shielding from their sight. The alarm didn't chime. It shrieked. The holographic maps turned a violent, bleeding red as 47 distinct signatures tore through the veil of slipspace. It was the automated siege fleet, unmanned, AI-coordinated warships designed for one purpose: the total plasma bombardment of anything with a heartbeat. They didn't negotiate. They didn't feel fear. They were a swarm of cold logic and hot fire, and they were already locking their primary batteries onto the fortress. Shields to maximum, Zal barked, his mandibles clashing in a panic that smelled of ozone and bitter musk. Ready the interceptors. We are outmatched. The fortress groaned under the sudden gravitational shear of the incoming fleet. Alarms wailed in a dozen different frequencies, and the zero-G war room became a chaotic swirl of floating data points and panicked officers. The Draxi were warriors, but even they knew the math of 47 heavy cruisers against one orbital station. Marcus stepped forward. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply moved to the center of the command deck, his boots magnetic locking to the floor with a heavy, metallic thud. Theska stayed exactly where she was. She watched him with a feral pride that made her secondary hearts beat in a synchronized, thundering rhythm. She knew what was coming. She had seen him practice in the dark, away from the prying eyes of the hive. Marcus looked back at her over his shoulder. It was a brief look, a silent communication forged in the fires of their bond. He didn't need her permission, but he wanted her witness. "Turn off the lights," Marcus said. His voice was a calm blade cutting through the cacophony of the failing station. It wasn't a request. It was a countdown. Theska reached out with a single clawed digit and slammed the manual override for the fortress's external sensor arrays and internal power grid. The war room plunged into a darkness so absolute that even the Draxi's infrared vision struggled to compensate. The only thing visible was the faint, blue-white glow beginning to arc between Marcus's fingertips. The darkness of the war room was not a void, but a canvas. For a Draxi, the world was a map of thermal signatures, yet Marcus had become a cold spot, a singularity of indrawn energy that defied their infrared sight. Theska felt the air ionize. The scent of ozone became so sharp it stung her spiracles, a metallic tang that tasted of ancient, redirected lightning. The pulse didn't travel. It claimed. It erupted from Marcus in a shimmering, violet-white sphere of raw kinetic intent. The command deck groaned as every secondary circuit remaining in the bulkheads fused instantly. Beyond the viewports, the 47 ships of the automated siege fleet were mid-maneuver, their AI brains calculating the final trajectory for a planetary extinction event. They were perfection in metal. They were unstoppable logic. He killed the fleet with one pulse. The violet wave struck the lead cruiser, then the next, cascading through the tight formation of the unmanned warships. In the silence of the vacuum, there were no explosions, only the sudden, graceful death of light. The glowing engine cores of the cruisers flickered and died. The navigation lights winked out. The heavy plasma batteries, already primed to fire, vented their energy uselessly into the dark as their magnetic containment fields collapsed. 47 of the galaxy's most feared predators became 47 drifting tombs of cold iron. They tumbled through the orbital plane, colliding with one another in a slow-motion dance of wreckage. The tactical AI hadn't just been defeated. It had been erased. Marcus didn't collapse. He stood in the center of the silent, dark war room, his breathing heavy but rhythmic. The blue arcs retreated from his skin, leaving behind a faint smell of burnt fabric and the static charge that made Theska's own armor plates vibrate. She could feel the shock radiating through the hive link. The generals were not clicking now. They were paralyzed, their sensory stalks fixed on the small, weak creature that had just rendered a multi-billion credit fleet into scrap metal. The silence after the violence was the deepest intimacy Theska had ever known. It was a shared secret between her hearts and his, a truth the rest of the Empire was only now beginning to digest. She had always known. She had felt the storm inside him when they first touched on the mud plains of his home world. Emergency red lights flickered to life, casting long, jagged shadows across the deck. Marcus turned away from the viewport and walked back toward her. His movements were slow, deliberate, the magnetic thud of his boots the only sound in the cavernous room. General Zal backed away as Marcus approached, the high-ranking Draxi's mandibles twitching in a gesture of primal submission. Marcus didn't look at the general. He didn't look at the maps. He stopped directly in front of Theska and reached up, his hand steady as he touched the cold edge of her chest plate. The warmth of his skin was a brand. "Lights are back on," he murmured. Theska looked over the heads of her subjects, her gaze sweeping the room with a territorial, searing pride. They would never pity her again. They would never question the fragile thing she kept at her side. They would look at Marcus and they would see the lightning she had tamed, the weapon she had bonded to her soul. She placed her primary hand over his, pinning his warmth against her armor. Her acid blood felt like liquid fire, a celebratory surge that hummed through her hive memory, recording this moment for 1,000 generations of Draxi to witness.